The Ulster Unionists come face to face with Sinn Féin at the Stormont talks. The Irish stock market's biggest takeover, Woodchester Investments, is sold for 600 million. And Gardaí question a man in connection with the murder of Detective Jerry McCabe. Hello and welcome to 6-1. Also on the programme, the presidency. The group campaigning against Eddie Roche meet in Cork this evening to discuss their next move, if any.
Just returned from North Korea, Irish parliamentarians say the country is standing on the brink of disaster. And the row about the Sligo RTE students who were told they'd failed an exam even though their papers weren't marked.
Leaders of Northern Ireland's largest Unionist party have faced Sinn Féin across the negotiating table, the first such meeting in 75 years. But they weren't there to discuss the future of Northern Ireland, rather to press for Sinn Féin's exclusion from the Stormont talks. Describing the Sinn Féin leaders as godfathers of terrorism, the Ulster Unionist delegation made a 30-minute presentation and then withdrew from the conference room without waiting to hear the response of Gerry Adams. The Unionist security spokesman Ken McGuinness said there was no direct contact with Sinn Féin. His party's statement was addressed to the talks chairman. Gerry Adams described the Unionist indictment as a sham. In the absence of Senator George Mitchell, today's plenary session was chaired by his deputy, the former Finnish Prime Minister Harry Holkeri. To his right sat the Ulster Unionist delegation, led by David Trimble and including Ken McGuinness. Seated opposite, Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness. The presence of these two delegations in the same room making this an historic moment. Also at today's session, representatives of the small loyalist parties, Gary McMichael of the UDP and David Irvine of the PUP, as well as the leader of the SDLP, John Hume, and the Alliance Party leader, John Alderdice.
The Ulster Unionists had taken just half an hour to deliver their indictment linking Sinn Féin to the IRA. David Trimble and Ken McGuinness didn't waste any time then, immediately leaving the chamber to underline their distaste at being forced to share the room with Republicans. They wouldn't say what their next move would be, but it was clear that while they might have left the chamber, they weren't leaving the process.
What we're not going to do is that we're not going to shirk our responsibilities. We're not going to leave these terrorists in the box seat with unionism marginalised, and we're not going to run away from the challenges. How we pursue the issue is a matter that we will decide ourselves. We will choose our tactics, and those tactics will vary.
Mr Trimble has had a series of meetings with Tony Blair in unsuccessful efforts to get the British Prime Minister to toughen his stance on Sinn Féin. Today, some of the frustration was showing.
The people on trial today are not just Sinn Féin, but also the Labour Party and the Labour government. That's what's on trial today. As to whether that government has any genuine commitment to democracy and whether it's allowing itself to be gulled along, that is an issue which we will want to hear the answer over the days and weeks to come.
Gerry Adams, secure in the knowledge that the government won't uphold the complaint against his party, said the afternoon had been a waste of time.
I think we've just been witness to a sham. This was heralded as the great confrontation, the great showdown, the great challenging of Sinn Féin. And the leaders of unionism come into the room, made a submission, and then scampered out of the room to talk to the media. And they would have served everyone well if they'd simply sent us it in a letter.
For Sinn Féin, the main business comes tomorrow, when both governments have promised the long-delayed move into the main talks agenda. But today the party had a warning.
And we want to see tomorrow substantive negotiations beginning about the future of this island. And I think that if that doesn't happen, and it's quite worrying that, that even in the attitude of the unionist parties today, that there are indications that they may not be yet willing to engage in real and meaningful negotiations. I think that if there are further delays in stalling, that both governments have big decisions to make, sooner rather than later.
John Hume was encouraged that so many parties were at last in the same room, but said he'd heard nothing new from unionists.
Well, it's predictable. They produced a litany of quotations from the past. We can all do that. We're in a new situation now, given that both governments are together, that all parties are called together, and that we have a peaceful situation. That's the new situation. And as I say, we've got to leave that past behind us and ensure that we have a future that leaves that past behind us.
But as delegates left this evening, their thoughts were not on the predictable outcome of this complaint, but on what's likely to happen tomorrow, amid worrying indications that the move into full-scale talks could yet again be delayed.
Well, David Davenport joins us from Stormont. David, the Unionists have gone to the negotiating table, but are we any nearer negotiations?
Well, some kind of Rubicon has been crossed, Brian, today, with the sight of the Ulster Unionists going in on the heels of Sinn Féin. Now, they say there wasn't any direct contact between the two parties in the conference room, such as the size of the room, but nonetheless they were in the same room. But the move into full-scale negotiations, which both governments had promised tomorrow, is really what's on the minds of many people here today, given that the outcome of the complaint against Sinn Féin is largely predictable. And there are signs tonight that that may not be straightforward. What it requires for the move to be made that would trigger the three-stranded process is effectively for unionists to agree to disagree on the whole decommissioning issue. And there aren't any signs tonight that they're willing to do that.
And there's no indication, is there, that this heralds their intention to return to the negotiating table? As we heard David Trimble saying there, we will choose our tactics and those tactics will vary.
The tactics will vary, but they will stay in the process, because David Trimble got a resounding mandate, not just from his executive council the week before last, but throughout the summer during the consultation process that his party undertook. From everybody, or virtually everybody that they met, they said you must stay with the talks process, even if the party was split about the rights and wrongs of sitting down opposite Sinn Féin. There was virtually one voice throughout the people they consulted, and that was they must stay with this talks process. So I think it's inconceivable that they would walk away, although, as Mr. Trimble says, his tactics and his strategy may vary.
David, thank you very much for that. David Davenport, Stormont.